This is Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana University basketball discussion, hosted by Inside the Hall founder and editor, Alex Bozich. Since 2007, Inside the Hall has been trusted by IU fans across the globe to be the one-stop shop for IU basketball news, commentary, and analysis. Join us over at InsideTheHall.com. That's InsideTheHall.com.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Podcast on the Brink. Pleased to be joined by Tyler Tachman of Inside the Hall and Dylan Wallace of SI Indiana. Both of these two guys joined me earlier in the season to recap Indiana's media day, and I wanted to get them back here to kind of get some impressions of Indiana's play so far through the first 7 games. Non-conference schedule is over with, and obviously Indiana had a big win over the weekend over Butler and has got Northwestern coming up on Wednesday. Welcome back, Dylan and Tyler. I'll start with you, Dylan. We're 7 games into the season now. Indiana's played as tough of a schedule as anybody in terms of Big Ten teams. What have you learned so far through 7 games about this Indiana team that maybe you didn't know going into the season?
I think, first of all, I guess I learned that, Armaan Franklin really took one of the biggest leaps kind of in the offseason than anybody else has. I think we expected him to play more. I think, we weren't surprised that he was necessarily in the starting lineup kind of with the 2 other guards and Rob and Al. But in terms of just his production, and especially offensively, I think that was one of the things that sort of surprised me the most. Obviously, he had a few games last year where he kind of, scored in double digits, but he seems to be doing that at a consistent rate. Defensively, just because he's like 6'5", I think he was always going to be someone that they could rely on the perimeter, but I think he's even taken a step forward in that regard. And I just think he's become a complete kind of player for them, and one that's going to be, I think, a bigger part of the offense and a bigger part of the team than we've kind of learned. I think we knew the defense was going to be pretty good, but it's so far it's been really solid, and it's probably going to be the big reasons why they're able to stay in a lot of games. And in terms of, I remember when we joined this podcast at Media Day, we talked about, whether or not the offense would look new, as a lot of players and Archie was talking about. And I think we've sort of seen it a little different, but there's still just those stretches where you just takes your mind back to the last 3 seasons where they can't get the ball in the basket, they can't hit outside shots. So I think a lot of that kind of seems the same, but I think there still has been improvements. So yeah, just the biggest thing for me is probably just Armaan's progression, and how it seems like it's going to be a consistent thing. I think which is a good thing for them. But yeah, in terms of just the overall team, they're gonna win games with their defense, and they got to play through Trayce, which I think they didn't do a lot. I think we're going to talk about Butler later. They didn't do a lot in the first half, but that's kind of their recipe for success right now.
Tyler, Dylan talked a lot about Armaan, and I think that's really, besides Trayce's play, the storyline this season is just the kind of the breakout of Armaan. But I want to talk a little bit about Trayce, because I feel like he's maybe being a little bit underrated right now nationally, and maybe just by Indiana fans. I looked the other day, I wrote this in 5 takeaways. Ken Palm has Player of the Year standings that he keeps. It keeps the top 10 players in the country. And Trayce has been at number 2 now for a couple of weeks. And the longer he stays there, the more you kind of wonder, is this guy being overlooked? Do you think at this point Trayce is playing better than you thought he would coming into the season? And do you think there is anything to that right now, that maybe he is being a little bit underrated and underappreciated nationally?
Yeah, I think it kind of, part of it was he didn't get off to the best start up to his standards, I guess you could say. He just missed a lot of kind of chippies around the rim. But then we saw after that Texas game, the flip kind of switched, or he really kind of turned it on, and it played great against Florida State. I think that, you're right, he is a little underrated right now, but if he continues to do this against the Big Ten competition, I think that's when you'll really start to see him get just a lot more attention. Because if he's putting up those numbers against Luka Garza, or even when they play Illinois on Saturday, if he's able to do that against Kofi Coburn, then I think you'll see people really start to take notice nationally. And another thing I think maybe why he doesn't get as much attention is just he doesn't really have an insanely flashy game. He's not going to be, thrown in threes from all over the place. And he's just a very just sound player. He has great hands, great footwork. He just finishes well. And I think part of this game that's really underrated is passing too. So he's just not gonna be someone that you watch and it just immediately jumps out to you that he's, maybe one of the best players in the nation, but it's someone that if you sit down and watch a whole game, then you can really kind of understand how skilled he is.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really has stood out to me about his play so far is, you mentioned he's not flashy, but I have noticed him being a lot more demonstrative on the court, a lot more aggressive than what we saw last year. And I think that's kind of the natural progression of a guy who came into college, obviously with a lot of expectations, but at the same time as a freshman, you're still learning how to adjust to the physicality, the speed of the game. And this year, he did start out very slowly, but credit to him, he has been a lot more assertive. You look at the percentage of shots that he's taken. I think his usage rate is in the 34% range right now. It was like 21% last year. So they are using him more frequently. Dylan, you watched him up close, obviously, last year a lot, covering the team on a day-to-day basis. Is there anything specific that you look at on Trayce this year and say he's better in that area, and that's kind of what's led to this? Or do you think this is just a matter of Indiana emphasizing him more as no doubt its focal point of the offense?
Yeah, I think it's kind of more about him because I think Indiana, even last year, they knew Trayce was kind of the point of the offense that they needed to get the ball to be effective, and whether they did that or not was here or there. But I think this year is also kind of much the same, and I just think for him, he's just been way more aggressive in wanting the ball. I remember in the Butler game, he kind of flashed wide open in the post. Trey Galloway had the ball. He didn't give it to him, and he was livid. He was really mad, and he let him know. I don't know if Trayce would have done that last year as a freshman with some of the older guards. I'm not sure if that would have been something he did, but you can tell, when he's posted up and the guards don't give him the ball, he's going to let him know because he wants it, and he knows that if you get him the ball in that spot, there's a good chance he'll score or get to the free throw line. I think kind of him realizing what he needs to be and how aggressive he needs to be has kind of made the difference with him. And, he also is starting to make his moves really quick, avoiding double teams a little better. And something that I really like that I wouldn't be mad if they did more was, if you give it to Trayce sort of at the elbow or toward the top of the key, when teams are making it difficult to get to him in the post, just flash him toward the elbow or top of the key, let him take, because I think the guy got Butler, he was much quicker than him. He could take him, maybe you don't have to do a dribble move, but, you could put the ball on the floor one time and spin and you're at the rim. And I think that, he did that in overtime against Florida State as well. So that's something that I think, if they can't get him the ball in the post, you kind of let him sort of make something on his own. And, I think he's capable of doing that. But yeah, I just think his mentality and him kind of demanding the ball now has made him just a lot better player. And I think it's something that is he needs to do. His teammates need him to be like that. And I think that's kind of the biggest sign for me that I've noticed this season, kind of that's made him, a different player than last year.
Yeah, as much as we picked apart Indiana over Archie Miller's first 3 seasons for their struggles offensively, I will give them credit this season, particularly the Florida State game. There's been a couple other instances where, as you mentioned, they've done a pretty good job of getting Trayce more room to operate by, instead of just posting him up and making it predictable on how to guard him, they've really brought him into space. The Florida State game in particular, where they were setting a lot of ball screens and using him out of that. And I think that's going to be really key going into Big Ten play, because if you're just going to park him on the block and you can't make threes consistently, there's a real risk of being very predictable in how to guard Indiana offensively. Tyler, have you been surprised at all at anything Indiana's done differently offensively. I feel like they're a little bit more creative and a little less predictable than what we've seen in the last 3 years. I don't know if that's just a result of Archie Miller being a little bit more comfortable with the personnel. They've got obviously 3 pretty good guards that can facilitate and run the offense. I've just been more impressed overall with kind of how fluid things have been offensively at times. While there's still work to do, I do think there are some things you can look at offensively with this team and say there's been progress made.
Hey, it's Jared, just jumping in here real quick so that we can talk about Home Field Apparel, your friends at homefieldapparel.com. You know, Christmas is coming up. You need to do your Christmas shopping, and homefieldapparel.com is definitely a stop that you need to make, both for the IU fans on your Christmas list, but also for anybody else, because it's not just IU stuff that they have right now, and they do have the best line of IU apparel, football logos, basketball logos. I mean, they have so much great stuff there for the IU fans on your list. But also, they have over 90-plus schools. So, you know, Home Field Apparel's whole thing is they go and they dig into the archives of different colleges and universities, pull out these old logos and brand marks that haven't been used in a while, put them on the comfiest material, whether it's the T-shirts, the sweatshirts, whatever it is. Their material is so comfy, so nice, so high quality, and you're going to find something for everybody. So go to homefieldapparel.com, use our promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, and you will get 20% off your entire order. So the IU page for all the IU apparel, and then you can browse all the other colleges and universities, and you're sure to find something for pretty much everybody on your Christmas list. Because even if you have someone on your Christmas list that didn't go to one of the colleges or universities Home Field does, they have so many cool, unique logos, you could probably find something for that person anyway. And if nothing else, just get them a comfortable hoodie or the comfortable joggers. I mean, it's such comfortable stuff. Gets you ready for the wintertime. Go do it now. Homefieldapparel.com. Use that promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K. You will get 20% off your entire order. That's homefieldapparel.com. Promo code B-R-I-N-K.
Yeah, I think some of it has to do with just all the guys playing with each other more. And plus you have the guys, the freshmen that have come in, that they've already played with each other a lot in Trey Galloway and Lander and Leo. So they just kind of have more familiarity with each other. And I think with the older guys, just having that extra year is just obviously going to really help with their chemistry. I mean, the thing that's kind of surprised me, obviously the offensive struggles at times have been a problem, but just the kind of lack of bench presence that there's not really a spark off of the bench. I think Dylan was talking about before how much we've seen Armaan Franklin grow into this kind of two-way player. And I think that's what a lot of people thought Jerome Hunter would be so far this year. And he hasn't really, he showed kind of flashes of that at times, of maybe a little post-up game and some good defensive plays. But overall, he hasn't really been the spark that, you know, maybe a lot of people hoped. There was talk about him possibly starting at the beginning of the year, but I don't really think he's proved so far, at least with his play, that he is ready to take on a role like that. And then Christian Landers just been, I think Archie Miller said a lot before the season. He said, you know, he's learning, give him time, you know, he's very talented, he's young. And I think that was a kind of code word for, you know, and it's not that he's not ready to play at this level, but he's just going to need a fair amount of time to kind of get acclimated to playing at the college level. So when I look at the offense, I'm just kind of looking at, like, if Armaan is not hitting threes, if Trayce is unable to navigate like he usually is, like, they need someone to come off of the bench and like provide some sort of help.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where potentially, and obviously potentially is a big word, maybe Parker Stewart could help them later in the season with that. We don't know exactly what's going to happen there. You know, it's been kind of weird. I've been meaning in the press conferences to ask Archie Miller about that, but there's so many other things, like after a game, before a game, that you want to ask. It seems like he hadn't been asked about that. And to my knowledge, I mean, Parker Stewart's not with the team yet. The other day during the game, he put something on Instagram or Twitter or something. He was tuning into the game, so he's not actually with the team. So it's going to be a while before he's available, but I think he could be a guy potentially, if he plays, that can give him something offensively. But you raise a really good point, Tyler, in that going into the season, one of the things that I thought, and we may have talked about it on the last podcast, but one thing I thought this team was going to have was depth. And you look at right now, I mean, Jordan Geronimo is not even getting off the bench. Neither is Anthony Leal. So either of those guys, for whatever reason, whether they're not ready, whether they're not doing enough defensively, Archie Miller's not confident enough to even put them in the game right now, in a close game at least. Trey Galloway's gotten some minutes. I think he's earned those minutes, but a lot of what he does offensively right now is dependent on him being able to drive to the basket. He's not a reliable outside shooter, so he's pretty predictable in terms of what he's going to do offensively. And Christian Lander played 2 minutes against Butler. Jerome Hunter, I think you raised a good point there as well. They've got to get more from him. Dylan, do you think right now Indiana's bench is more of a weakness than a strength at this point? Because that's kind of how I'm looking at it. And I'm not saying that can't change, because a lot can happen in a month and in 6 weeks. These guys can get more confident. They can get some experience. I think a lot of times with freshmen, all it takes is one really good game to get them some confidence. And maybe you see that happen for Lander coming up in the next couple of weeks. But right now, you know, this looks like, to me, at least right now, a team that's going to be playing 6 or 7 guys the most minutes, and then whatever you can get from the other fringe guys is basically a bonus right now.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a concern, and it's not what I thought was going to be kind of what it looked like this year, just because of all the guys that we thought he's going to be able to play, and we thought they're going to be able to be productive. Trey Galloway, I think, has had really good moments. Most notably, I think they came in the Tennessee Tech and North Alabama game. So, and he got out, he's really good getting out in transition, but in the half court offense, he hasn't really done a whole lot yet. With Jerome Hunter, I'm kind of getting nervous about Jerome Hunter. I think, me more than anyone, I've been saying that, he'll take the next step. He'll be this completely dynamic player for them. And it just seems like he's kind of stuck in the mud right now of like what he is right now. Might be what he is, just what he is. He's just a guy that might come in and hit a few threes. He's not particularly great defensively, and they're playing him at the 4 right now. He's obviously kind of an undersized 4, and I don't know if that's going to change in Big Ten play where guys are bigger. If you're going to move him to the 3 and try to play like that, I'm not sure. But yeah, with him, I just don't know how big of a kind of progression he's going to make. Maybe at least this season. Just seems like his role is kind of defined, and that's kind of where he's at. And I guess I don't know. It doesn't seem like Joey Brown's going to be available anytime soon. But I'd be curious. If he were to play, would he start and you bring Race Thompson off the bench? Because Race Thompson obviously would be a huge guy to bring in kind of off the bench. But I think at this point, I think Race Thompson's kind of solidified himself as a starter on this team. But it just seems like, there's 7 guys. It's the 5 starters, and it's Jerome and Trey that are going to be at least guaranteed some minutes every single game. With Christian Lander, he just seems like he's timid and he's kind of afraid to make a mistake right now, and doesn't seem too comfortable on the floor, and he seems kind of frantic, which, he's a freshman. So I guess you kind of get that, and you kind of hope maybe as playing time comes that kind of goes away. With Jordan Geronimo, I mean, I'm not sure, he doesn't seem like Archie looks to really play him at all, but, when you're looking for rebounding or kind of another body to throw in, because your front court depth really isn't anything right now. And, maybe he could just, play 5 minutes a game. And if anything, he'll just give Trayce or Race the time to get to catch a breath. And, he's athletic. Maybe he can get some rebounds for you. I'm not sure kind of what the plan is. But yeah, with Big Ten play coming up, I think it's definitely a big concern for them because, we've seen as Tyler mentioned, like if the starters aren't doing much and their production isn't great, who's going to come in and be that spark off the bench? I think you're right. I think Parker Stewart could definitely be one. And it's just a matter of kind of whether or not he's comfortable enough or the team wants him to get him rushing back or anything. So, that's definitely something to keep an eye on. But yeah, this bench, I think it's a concern right now. I think, they were able to get a few good minutes, but those were, again, just mostly in like the Tennessee Tech and North Alabama game. So maybe that helps their confidence. Maybe that makes them a little bit more ready if they're called upon in Big Ten play. But yeah, I just think it's definitely a concern. I don't think it's a lot. I don't think it's what a lot of people expected heading into this year with this roster.
Yeah, it's definitely not a ringing endorsement of the bench and how they played so far. When we're sitting here talking about a guy with a back injury that may not play anytime soon, being a key. It's coming back, and a guy who transferred hasn't played a minute of basketball for this team as a potential solution to the bench. And I mean, I'm looking at Lander is kind of, I don't want to say an X factor for the season, but I mean, they're going to have to get something out of him. And I think early on, the thing I saw out of him was he was just trying to do way too much offensively. You saw that in the Maui games in Asheville. Tyler, you were there. He came in and just took some crazy wild shots. It was almost like he felt like he was back in high school again and kind of had the green light. I think he had to be reined in a little bit. With Anthony Leal and Jordan Geronimo, the thing I see right now are I don't see anything because they're not playing, but my opinion on this would be that the one non-negotiable for Archie Miller is defense, and he must not think that either one of those guys can handle what they're being asked to do defensively. Otherwise, they'd be playing a little bit, particularly Leal, because he can space the floor. You would think, at least be a serviceable three-point shooter. So the defense there, to me, is the key. I want to go back for a minute to the Butler game, and before we talk about Big Ten and what's coming up, Tyler, it was an interesting start, I felt like, to the Butler game because Indiana was lighting it up from three, but they weren't playing any defense. So it was kind of like the opposite of what we've seen out of Indiana. Usually they're playing really well defensively and they can't make a shot from the perimeter. But the second half, I thought they really settled in and played as good defensively as we've seen them play this whole season. I think Butler only scored something like 0.66 points per possession in the second half. It was basically a total shutdown of everything that they wanted to do. Have you been surprised at all how well the last two games Indiana shot it from three? I mean, that to me, that's another thing that you look going forward. If this team's going to kind of outperform expectations in Big Ten play, we kind of know what to expect out of the defense. It's top 10 right now in the country in Ken Palm, but I think they need to have at least some consistency with the three-point shooting. So are you encouraged by the fact that the last couple of games they've been able to make some threes, and do you think it's at all sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, they have good shooters kind of all over the floor. At least they have the potential to make shots. I mean, Rob Finney can make shots. We've seen Armaan Franklin make shots, and Al Durham certainly can do that too. So I think, I mean, they have the guys to do it. It's just a matter of if they're going to fall. And we've seen how last year, that's not always the case. If you have good shooters, it's not always going to happen. But I guess kind of the bigger concern for me was just like you were mentioning, the first half slow start. We've seen that a couple of times this year, especially with Texas. And then Florida State, they got off to a fairly slow start too. And when I look at that, Archie Miller said at halftime, they kind of realized, okay, we got to get going now. But I mean, you're playing against Illinois this coming week. You can't wait till halftime to decide, oh, we're going to start playing now. When you're playing Iowa or Wisconsin, you can't decide at halftime, like, okay, it's time to turn it up a notch. So, I mean, it was a 11:30 a.m. start, it was an early game, but those kind of starts where they don't have a lot of energy and get down early, if you have that in the Big Ten, it'll be a repeat of Texas because you just don't have the offensive firepower to get back in the game, no matter how good your defense is.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty big concern, particularly at home, is where's the energy going to come from, right? Because there's no fans this year anywhere. I think one thing I thought about a lot in the preseason was this is a great opportunity for Indiana to be better on the road than they've ever been in the last couple of years. But then I also think on the flip side, this is an opportunity for a team like Northwestern, who's coming in on Wednesday night after just absolutely destroying Michigan State last night, to come into an assembly hall that's going to be empty, sans some family and the small amount of people that are going to be there. I want to talk a little bit about the Big Ten so far, because it's already getting off to a start where you look at it and say it's going to be as unpredictable and as difficult as ever. Some of the results just over the weekend: Illinois lost at Rutgers. Not totally surprising, but for Rutgers to score 91 points was a little bit surprising to me because of how offensively challenged they've been. And then what Northwestern did to Michigan State, I think it just kind of reemphasized the fact to me that this league, there's going to be no off nights. If Northwestern can beat Michigan State, and they're a team that was, I think, picked by many people to be 13th or 14th in the Big Ten. If they can win that game as convincingly as they did, there's not going to be any room for error. And Tyler, you brought up an excellent point. They're not going to be able to afford to come out playing with no energy and expect to get away with that. Dylan, as you look ahead to the start of Big Ten play, I mean, it's actually been 8 days now since I think Michigan and Penn State played the first conference game. So there's been a little film to review and games to watch so far, but anything standing out to you just about the league in general? It looks like to me, Wisconsin so far has been the most impressive team overall. Iowa kind of showed some of its shortcomings in the Gonzaga game. I think defensively they're really going to struggle. Illinois has already lost 3 games. Michigan State just got smacked by Northwestern. Wisconsin, to me, may not have the highest ceiling, but I think in terms of the highest floor, I'm looking at them as a team that's really going to be difficult to play in Big Ten play.
Yeah, I would say early on, sort of Wisconsin showed that they might be kind of the top dog in the Big Ten right now, just to the way that they've kind of handled non-conference play. And I don't think they've played a Big Ten game yet.
No, they haven't. But yeah. I think they lost. The only game they lost was that. I think it was was a tip in to Marquette.
Yeah, Marquette.
That was an early game. But then they absolutely destroyed Louisville over the weekend. It was a shorthanded Louisville team, but still to have them down by almost, I think at one point by 40. That's pretty darn good. They made 16 threes.
Yeah, they completely dominated them, and if it's getting the feel, after the Northwestern win last night, I'm getting the feel of kind of what the start to last Big Ten season was like, where I think the home team won like the first 13. They were like 13-0 or something crazy like that throughout December and maybe a little bit of January. Which is obviously, there's no kind of crowd, but still, playing at home, you're more comfortable and whatnot. So, I'm getting the feeling that maybe something might happen like that again. But yeah, it's going to be extremely tough. And it seems like, once you get into Big Ten play, it just seems like the teams can play you evenly, no matter what. They're going to give you a challenge. Illinois has kind of showed some struggles as of late. I don't think that the Rutgers loss is that bad. It was on the road, but still, I mean, they've struggled in the non-conference slate. They lost to Missouri. They lost to some other teams. I think Baylor was the other one. Iowa, obviously, Alex, you always say kind of their shortcomings defensively, and I think the amount of points Gonzaga put on them was the most against a top 5 team, something like that. So yeah, that was definitely interesting. But yeah, I mean, just the Big Ten just seems like a parity that's going to have kind of within its own conference. I think that's going to be something that it's going to make things challenging in Indiana. I think one of the bigger reasons Indiana beat Iowa and they beat, a top-ranked Penn State and they beat, Michigan State last year, they were at home and they had, a hot crowd for each one of those games. And, what does it look like when you don't have that? And you hope that they're able to sort of create their own energy. I think it was North Alabama, I believe, because that was one of the games I was able to be at this year. They started out kind of slow, and Trayce kind of, got into the bench's face and kind of like clapped at him like, hey, get energized because we need this energy. So, you got to create your own energy to make things happen. I think, this Northwestern game becomes a lot more interesting now coming up just because of what they were able to do to Michigan State, who I think that was their first loss of the year so far. But yeah, I just think the parity of the league is going to be probably maybe a little better than it was last year, which is going to make things difficult in Indiana. So, it's going to be a challenge. And if you can, do well in this conference slate, it shows that you're a pretty good team.
Yeah, Archie Miller was probably tuning in last night to that game if he watched it at all, thinking to himself, this is actually good to see this because now these guys are going to have to take Wednesday a lot more serious. Not that they don't take every opponent serious, but you look at, I looked at Indiana's start to the Big Ten schedule. Obviously, it's tough going to Illinois second game, but I think coming up after that, they have Penn State and Maryland at home. And you kind of looked at this as an opportunity of, you play well, you take care of business, and you're 3-1, and you're in pretty good spot. But now, all of a sudden, you're thinking you could have a problem with Northwestern. Tyler, what did you see? I don't know if you had a chance to watch any of that last night. To me, I looked at the box score. I watched a little bit of it. Boo Buie hitting 5 of 6 threes. To me, that seems like a little bit of an anomaly. I don't know that that's going to happen. Michigan State obviously didn't play well, but it underscores the fact that Indiana is going to have to play well and take things seriously on Wednesday if they want to walk away with the first Big Ten win.
Yeah, I watched the whole game, and I mean, it was never really in doubt. Northwestern controlled for pretty much the whole game, and I kind of kept sitting there saying, I'm gonna, Michigan State's gonna make this run at some point, maybe in the second half, and the game kind of just kept going on, and they never made the run, and Northwestern just kind of kept control. But yeah, Boo Buie looked really good. He's not the biggest guard, but he's very quick and had some deep threes. There was one that, I mean, he threw from close to the logo. That was a heat check that he missed, but that was just the kind of confidence that he was shooting with. And then Pete Nance down low. I think I'm really intrigued to see that matchup with Trayce Jackson-Davis, because Nance, he moves very well. He made a three, so he kind of has a little bit more presence on the perimeter, and he has a good post game as well. So and very strong down low. So I'm interested to see kind of how Trayce will match up with him, if he can be able to stop him. And I know Northwestern also had a freshman that I think was in double digits too. And Northwestern's defense looked great too. They made Michigan State look pretty bad. Rocket Watts on Michigan State didn't score, I think, until like 2 minutes left in the game. So that's a concern for me, is like with how good kind of Northwestern's defense looked, is can Indiana get something going offensively, and then can they stop what they allowed Butler to do in the first half, in terms of Northwestern kind of slow them down offensively. So I think it's definitely going to be something like Alex, you mentioned. I thought it was a game, maybe, you get a good quick win over Northwestern, and then watching that game, it's like that obviously probably won't be the case.
Yeah, they've proven, I think, Indiana's beaten them, I think, the last couple of times they played at home, but they've played them close every time. I want to talk a little bit about Michigan State right now. Dylan, I look at them, and they obviously played really well to start the season. They beat Notre Dame pretty easily. They won at Duke, which I don't know how good Duke is. At this point, they've already lost 2 home games to Big Ten teams. But, I think people maybe underestimated. They obviously, people give a ton of credit to Tom Izzo, and that's definitely fair based on what he's accomplished as a coach. But losing Xavier Tillman and Cassius Winston, that's not very easy to overcome at all. And I think last night was the first time you looked at them and you said they really missed Cassius Winston, because, as Tyler mentioned, Rocket Watts was basically unplayable at times last night. And then you look at their other guards. I mean, Josh Langford, he's a fine player. He's a former McDonald's All-American, but he's been pretty much injured his whole career. I mean, Foster Lawyer is, I think, on a really good team, a backup. And then they're relying on Aaron Henry. Obviously he can do some things with the ball, but he was bad last night too. So they don't have that guy that is experienced, is one of the better all-time point guards that we've seen in the Big Ten last night. And I think last night really kind of exposed Michigan State for its lack of leadership, particularly on the perimeter.
Yeah, I think it did. I think Michigan State is, honestly, I think they're going to be good this season, but I think they're going to have a lot of these moments where they're going to kind of be up and down, inconsistent, just because of everything you just said. Even when I was watching them play Duke, they started out pretty poorly in that first half, and I just kind of got the feeling like, oh man, like this team could have some issues. They ended up kind of rallying, and their defense kind of got them back in the game, and they went on a big run, which was impressive, but it still didn't, still from what I saw, I could see them being a team where, you struggle at times to score and kind of have that kind of consistency on the court, which is kind of came to the front against Northwestern. I think Rocket Watts is a really good player, but he's obviously no Cassius Winston. He can shoot the three, but in terms of being like the floor general that Cassius was, and bringing the sort of the calming presence and sort of the consistency to the floor, he doesn't quite have that yet. Aaron Henry is a guy that, he's a really good defender, and he can, rebound the ball, but, he can't really shoot it that well. He can shoot it okay, but, it's just an interesting makeup kind of that they have on the team. And, they obviously don't even have, Xavier Tillman either. And he was just a really, really good defender. And he was sort of the interior presence that, kind of went along with Cassius Winston that made them really good. So, yeah, I think this is going to be something that we kind of see a lot. I think Joey Hauser has been a good addition, but I don't think he has been exactly what they've kind of envisioned him to be yet. I think he's a pretty good shooter, but still, I mean, I just think there's a lot of things for them to kind of work out. And obviously, some of the young guys that we kind of saw last year, like Malik Hall and kind of Gabe Brown, they're kind of energizer guys, but just in terms of bringing it every night, it's going to be interesting. And, Josh Langford, as you said, I felt like so long ago when I watched him play IU in Assembly Hall, and he was like really, really good. I think it might have been 2017, maybe. And he was like really good against them. And he obviously hasn't played for a while, and he's been out for a long time, and he's just not going to be that guy for you anymore. It's just not the player he is. So, there's definitely going to be some kinks for them to work out. But yeah, I mean, what we saw last night against Northwestern, I think is going to be something that might arise for them a few other times this season. And I don't think it means the sky is falling for them. I think they'll be okay. I think they're going to get through the Big Ten season and do a pretty good job kind of staying near the top. But still, I mean, there's going to be a lot of moments for them where you're kind of going to scratch your head and be like, what's up with this team? It seemed like, from some of the vibes, some of the reporters that cover Michigan State got last night, like they didn't show up. They didn't have kind of the mentality, or they didn't have kind of what it took to I don't know, stay in the game, or it just looked like they were kind of just weak and weren't kind of ready for what happened to them. So, I think it's a concern for them. I think they'll be okay, though. But, yeah, I mean, definitely you could tell that's a team that doesn't have Cassius Winston or Xavier Tillman anymore, which is going to be something to kind of watch for and look out for as the season goes on.
Yeah, it doesn't get any easier for them either. I think they go to Wisconsin for their next game. So they're either going to turn it around and put up a fight, or it's going to go downhill there pretty quickly. I'll get both of you guys out of here on this one. And Tyler, you go first, then Dylan follow up if you'd like. Just what are you looking to learn this week out of these two games? It's weird that we're having Big Ten games right around Christmas, but here we are. I think there's 4 actually Big Ten games on Christmas Day. Not sure how I feel about that yet. Usually it's a day that is kind of reserved for the NBA, but with the circumstances, with everything going on with COVID-19, the Big Ten's kind of just going ahead and playing through here, and they're going to have, I think, 4 games on Christmas Day, but Indiana plays Wednesday night, as we mentioned. They'll play at home against Northwestern, and then on Saturday, 4 p.m. in the afternoon tip at Illinois. So for both of you guys, Tyler, as I said, go first, but what are you looking forward to the most about these 2 games? And is there anything you think we'll learn about Indiana after the 2 games this week?
Yeah, the kind of one of the big things I'm looking for is, especially against Northwestern, I guess, just kind of first off is, I mean, this year I feel like Rob Finney hasn't been the type of guy that everyone has kind of hoped that he would be this year. Coming into this season, he was the healthiest he's kind of ever been in his career, and it seemed like this was going to kind of be his year. And it's honestly seemed like the same kind of Rob we've seen from last year, where he was in and out of injuries. So I'm looking for him to see if he can, really kind of assert himself. He's played good defense, but assert himself on the offensive end even more. And also Al Durham. I think he's done a good job, but those are the 2 guys that you really need, just experienced guards that I don't think you've necessarily gotten the most out of so far this year. So I think those are 2 guys that really need to step up, because when the conference grind gets going, you need those veterans to be able to lean on, especially if they get into late game situations. And then against Illinois, I think just kind of looking to see if how Trayce shows out, if he can continue to prove himself against another one of the best big men in the country. Because we saw him kind of get overwhelmed against Texas. And he did play very well against Florida State, which had some big guys, but I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say they're the most skilled or, best in the country. But so I'm looking at Trayce to see if he can, like we were talking before, really take a step into the national spotlight and keep those big performances up when they're really going to need him to play well.
Yeah, I think what I'm looking for is just are they able to sort of get up and kind of be motivated for each game? Is it going to be a situation where, you get up for Providence, you don't get up for Texas, you get up for Stanford? How is that going to play out kind of over the course of this gauntlet of a Big Ten season you're about to face? Are you going to be able to kind of bring the energy and bring kind of the intensity for each opponent? Because that's what you're going to need to win, games in this conference. I'll also look into kind of see if you can avoid the scoring droughts, because I remember last year during Big Ten play, I mean, you're like guaranteed at least during the game there's going to be maybe at the least a 3 to 4 minute scoring drought. Sometimes it'd be even bigger than that. And that was just tough to watch sometimes. The Northwestern game last year in Assembly Hall, oh my gosh, I think, Alex, you and I were both there, and I think there was like close to like a 10-minute scoring drought or something. Indiana had to kind of like rally back from behind and win the game at the end. And, that was in Assembly Hall too with fans. So it's just something that I think we need to look out for. I know the offense has obviously looked a little bit better. There's been a little more creativity, but if you can avoid moments like that in this conference, that's going to help a lot. And that's something that, I'm not going to believe it until I see it happen, until they prove that they can kind of get out of those funks if they get snap into one. But yeah, I think this is going to be a good test for them. Northwestern at home is going to become a little bit more of an intriguing game now, as we talked about. And then on the road against Illinois, in Champaign last year, they played them right to the end. They lost by 3, I think, and that was a pretty good game. And Indiana had a really good shot to beat them. So it's basically sort of the same Illinois team, and it's sort of the same Indiana team. So are you going to be able to kind of go toe to toe with them, even though they might have a little bit more of a national attention on them as they did last year? Can you go and compete with them? I think if you can kind of do that, I think you should. I hope that they would beat Northwestern and then kind of Illinois. If you play them tight on the road, it's going to be, I think, a promising sign for fans that this team is going to show that they can be competitive throughout this Big Ten season. So I think the expectations. I think they're 5-2 now through the non-conference, and that's over with. So it's kind of time to kind of see what this team's all about, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with everything both of you guys said. I mean, I think if Indiana wants to be a team that's going to be, I don't want to say in contention for the Big Ten title, because I don't think that's the expectation, but if they want to be in that mix right in the middle, they've already set themselves up really well with a 5-2 non-conference record. They played the toughest schedule as anybody. I think if they get through Big Ten play with a 500 or better record, they're a lock for the tournament at this point based on what they've done in the non-conference. But if they want to be better than that, like a team that's 5th, 6th in the league, that's one thing. Last week I talked with Brian Butch from BTN on the podcast, and he was saying that he thought Indiana could be in contention for that 5 or 6 spot. Wednesday is a game you got to win, right? To be able to do that, you can't put yourself in a position where you're losing home games to teams that are picked in the bottom 3 or 4 in the conference. Those are games you absolutely have to win. So we'll see how it goes. I don't think anything's a given this year in the Big Ten. It's as tough as of a league as I've seen. It's just the coaching is really good, and I think the fact that you've got programs now like Rutgers with Steve Peichel, you've got even Nebraska. I think eventually with Fred Hoiberg is going to really raise its level of play. And you just look around; there's just no teams that you look at on a given night and say we're going to beat them easily. So we'll be obviously covering every game. As always, you can read Tyler's work on Inside the Hall. Dylan will have coverage as well over at SI Indiana. I encourage you to check him out as well. And we will be back next week to recap what happened in the Northwestern game and the Illinois game, to look ahead to Penn State, I think, comes to Bloomington next week on Wednesday. So Big Ten play is here. I'm excited. Obviously wish it was a little bit different in terms of having fans and being able to watch the games up close. But, I think everyone is just thankful that we're able to have a season in whatever format. And it looks like that Indiana is going to be a team that's going to be a lot of fun and interesting to follow. So Dylan and Tyler, thanks for joining us. And we'll be back, everybody, again next week with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.